You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
Hey y'all, Michael here. A couple of items before we get started on this episode. First, a huge thank you to everyone who came out to that reading in Raleigh by members of the North Carolina chapter of Horror Writers Association. We had the absolute best time, and it was such a joy to get to hang out and talk to people after. We all really appreciated it, and I want to thank all y'all for being there. We're planning to do more group readings like that over the rest of the year and change up where we do them. So it might be easier for people in other parts of the Carolinas to see them, but we don't totally know exactly how that's going to work yet. I'll keep y'all in the loop on that as those plans develop. And speaking of other places and other times when we can get to hang out, I'll be at the Black Mountain Public Library in Black Mountain, North Carolina on May 8th at 6 p.m. to talk about a super weird story from the region. So I'd love to see folks there. There'll be a link to the library in the show notes. I'll also be at Carolina Fear Fest in Raleigh, North Carolina, May 24th through May 26th. And as always, at both of those, I'll be giving away a ton of swag and t-shirts and stickers and all kinds of fun stuff. I'll also be doing some panels at Carolina Fear Fest, so be sure to stop by and see me there. And, because there's a lot going on this year, remember last year when we said that this year we were going to do less? Well, this is less. Also, I'll be a congregate in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in July with special guest Tally Johnson. So I am super excited about that. And the same weekend, Congregate is partnered with a genre writing conference called Saga, where I'll be teaching a workshop on genre blending. So there will be links to both of those in the show notes also. And last, but definitely not least, Charlie and I will be doing our spooky season kickoff recording September 26th at Arcane in Durham, North Carolina, and it is going to be really special this year. Charlie has been cooking up some unbelievably cool stuff for that. Y'all just have no idea. So we'll have more info on that as the time approaches. It is hard to believe, as I sit here saying this, that we are already closer to next spooky season than we are from last spooky season. But those crisp autumn nights and all the ghosts and goblins will be on us before we know it. So mark your calendars now. And with that, on with the show. And thanks for listening. Are you ready to go?
I am, with superior audio quality.
Yes, indeed.
I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw, and that little noise that you may have heard on the last couple of episodes was my fault because I had a noise gate on my microphone, but I took that off for superior audio quality.
I'll see if I can add some reverb on that. I don't know. We could do one of those like car crusher monster truck commercials. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. This week at the PNC Arena, it's Michael
driving the history crusher. I don't know. It's just me jumping a big pile of textbooks.
Bog Squatch. If Bog Squatch isn't the name of a monster truck, it should be.
Oh, now I want us to be a monster truck team. Okay.
It'd be Bigfoot's rival, right?
It's probably too late in life for me to become a monster truck driver, and that's okay.
When I was a kid, I had a really good Bigfoot, the truck toy, and it was so cool. It had a little plastic key, and you would put the key in the back and turn it, and it would just go.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Took those big honking 1980s D batteries that would corrode like at the mere suggestion of moisture. Rip through them in 30 minutes of play.
You could walk those things past a weather forecast and they'd turn into nothing but rust.
Ruining toys since 1962. Whenever they were. Anyway.
So the name of this episode is going to be The Ghost Rider of Hopewell.
Well, Hopewell.
But we're going to get there by starting by talking about the Revolutionary War.
Okay. Always a fun topic.
Always.
It actually is. Like, it's one of those, like, it's long enough ago that you can make jokes about some of the people. It was against England. You can always make fun of England.
There's nobody weirdly attached to any of it as an identity.
Exactly.
Let's go to January 17th, 1781, and talk about the Battle of Cowpens, which happened in South Carolina.
Cowpens. What's the etymology on that? Do you think it's named that because it was literally a place where there were cow pens?
Yes, there's actually a theory as to whose cow pens they were.
Really?
It's one of two people's literal cow pens. But there is also, confusingly, a town called Cowpens, South Carolina, which is not where this battle happened. It is relatively near where this battle happened.
About 30 miles south of Cowpens, you turn right at the town of Slop Trough. We're just naming it after farm things.
Yeah, why not? You know, where are you from?
Slop Trough.
Slop Trough. The next time somebody asks at a thing where I grew up in the mountains, because that's a thing that people have sometimes asked because I never say the name of the place. I'm going to say that I grew up in Slop Trough, North Carolina. It's going to be really funny. It's going to be really good.
There you go. It's my gift to you today.
Thank you. I accept that gift and I will use that gift. So on...
I broke him. It took, what, 3 minutes? Maybe? I want a timestamp.
6 minutes, 53 seconds.
That's good, though. I needed that. It's been the kind of day where I needed that. So, on January 17th, 1781, Brigadier General Daniel Morgan for the Americans had 600 seasoned soldiers from the Continental Army and then 500 basically untrained militia who were just like people who showed up with their hunting muskets.
Ragtag.
Yeah. And there's a lot of history to get them to this place that I'm going to skip over because we don't have 7 hours. But they were in upstate South Carolina and they were being pursued by the British. The British were really pissed. I probably can't say that.
The British have always been really pissed. I think it's in their disposition.
Okay.
Oh, good heavens. This is unconscionable.
Well, they were really living up to the stereotype in this moment because they had lost a battle that they had not expected to lose. They had lost a lot of supplies and they had lost them to Brigadier General Daniel Morgan. So they were pursuing him, the army that he had with him. And in doing so, they sent an officer named Lieutenant Colonel Bannister, spelled Banastre. So it's like Banastre, but Bannister, the fancy kind of handrail. Bannister Tarleton.
Ah, Lord Fancy Pants himself. Yes. Have you seen my fancy pants? Bannister, come hither.
I think it's worth noting for listeners that we actually talked about this topic at RetCon, but the audio was totally unusable for various reasons. And at that version of it, I showed a portrait of Tarleton, and dude has a major hat game going.
Tarleton.
He looks like somebody who would be named Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. He's definitely got that British fop thing going.
Looks like the Grand Admiral of the Booster Club.
Yes.
Just covered in bits and bobs.
Yeah. There's a lot of brass and a lot of feathers involved in his presentation. He looks like somebody who has been newly elected to an office at the yacht club.
Yeah.
And is taking it very seriously.
Yes.
He had with him 1,000 British soldiers, 1,000 redcoats, and they were experienced, trained, kitted out soldiers.
And when you say kitted out, this was a terrible time to be involved in war. Kitted out meant you have pants.
Oh, yeah. Things were so bad. I'm going to get to how bad things were in a minute. But just to remind people, this was January, mid-January. And yeah, it was in South Carolina, but it was still really cold. These were freezing temperatures. And the Americans had no equipment whatsoever. In fact, many of them were wearing uniforms that they had stripped from captured or dead British soldiers. In theory, the Continental Army wore green as its color, but a lot of soldiers in Daniel Morgan's army at this time were wearing red because that was what they could take from the battlefield.
Sure. And it's honestly not a terrible idea if their buddies knew who they were.
Yeah. The British knew that Morgan was a very capable commander, but
because he just ate their lunch.
Yeah. But they believed that the soldiers he was leading were so untrained and inexperienced that they would present no difficulty whatsoever.
Sure.
Very overconfident. So Morgan set up the American forces at the top of this gently sloping ridge at the battle site. He picked his location and waited for the British to march on them. And the British obliged by charging right up this hill at them. And the American forces basically did a false retreat by going a little further up the ridge as though they were in full retreat and running away. And that encouraged the British to just keep running even faster up this hill to the point that Tarleton was like, this is it. The battle's already over. Like, it's been like 30 seconds and we've won. And he turned around and headed back to camp. And
typical Bannister.
And this is, for anybody who remembers this from grade school history lessons, this is the battle where the order for the Americans was don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. It was Morgan who said that. But as the British charged up the hill and the Americans pretended to be in retreat, the Americans reached the top of the hill, turned back around, and at the same time, 2 other companies rode in from the sides, and they thus surrounded the British forces.
Aha! How you like me now?
The answer, not very much.
Tricky.
In the end, 100 British soldiers out of that 1,000 died, but 800 of them were taken captive, which is an enormous number of prisoners of war, to the point that they had to set up a second camp, basically just to house them.
Yeah, it's a lot of people to take care of in the winter.
Yeah. A tactic, or strategy rather, that had worked in a fairly recent, at that point, battle in New York, and in some other locations as well, had been engage the British, then turn around and hightail it away, like in the opposite direction from wherever they had their supplies stored, and get them to follow so that they'll get their supply train will get really strung out over the landscape. They'll get really far from reinforcements and more supplies and everything, and then turn around and fight them. And this was another example of doing that. And the Americans at this point had figured out that was a strategy that was just going to keep working. So they engaged them in cowpens partly for that reason. They wanted to piss off Lord Cornwallis, the commander of the British forces, badly enough that he would order his army to keep chasing the Continental Army north and get them farther and farther from Charleston.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as this battle was over and they had these 800 prisoners, like not exactly locked up, rounded up, and people guarding them, and the rest of the forces that Morgan commanded just took off for North Carolina. Cornwallis could not move quickly enough to keep up with them. And so in order to gain ground, he ordered his army to burn their own supply wagons. They got rid of their extra clothes. They got rid of their extra food. They got rid of everything, basically, but what they were wearing, just enough food to pursue into North Carolina, and 4 empty wagons to carry the wounded.
I'm envisioning when you're driving down the highway and you see that somebody's like suitcase has fallen off the top of their car and there's just clothes.
Yeah, totally. However, I found it interesting to read that on their way to North Carolina, Cornwallis's forces ran across a big supply of leather. So they stopped and had everybody make new soles for their shoes.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really smart of them. It's easy to frame that as a silly choice, but that was very smart.
You got to take care of your feet.
Yeah. And 2 weeks later, they caught up to Morgan's forces, where Morgan's forces were arrayed to greet them in modern day Huntersville, North Carolina, at the Catawba River.
Ah, yes.
And that is where a battle took place that is called today the Battle of, and I'm going to get this name wrong, I know it, welcome correction from anybody who knows how to say it correctly. I said it in front of Tally and he didn't correct me, but I don't know if that means anything because sometimes Tally's too nice to correct people. So.
Not to me. He corrects me all the time.
The Battle of Cowan's Ford, Cowan. And Cowan's Ford was a particular place in the Catawba River where there were 2 fords in one location. One of them was the horse ford and one of them was the wagon ford. The wagon ford went a slightly different direction, came out on the opposite side of the river in a slightly different place, but it was wider, not as deep. The horse ford was a little more tricky, and there was an island in the middle of the river at this place. The horse ford took advantage of that island to get across part of the river without having to be on the water, and it was wide enough for multiple horses to go by side, but it was sufficiently deep and the river sufficiently swift that people would have to use a pole to keep track of where they were on the riverbed.
Aren't you glad we have bridges?
Yes, very glad. It was possible to get swept away, things like that. Well,
it's not funny. I don't know why I did that. It's not funny. It's a little funny.
It's a little funny. Yeah.
It's a little funny.
There were 4 places at the Catawba River that the Americans expected the British would tread across. And one of those was Cohen's Ford. One of those was a place called Beatty's Ford or Beatty's Ford, and that name will come up again. And these places were all pretty close to each other.
Many Fords.
Mustangs, escorts.
That's
so,
good.
Thank you. Do you like how formal I am in my gratitude for recognizing a little joke?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
That was of the humorous variety. That's how the British would have said. Yes, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll get a thank you note in the mail tomorrow. One of those places was Cohen's Ford. That was actually one of the places where they didn't expect the British to cross, but they put some troops there just in case. The British reached the Catawba River in the middle of the night, and they knew that there were Americans waiting for them because they could see the campfires on the opposite side of the river. But it's worth noting that there had been a lot of rain. By this point, it was February 1st of 1781. The intervening 2 weeks had been just bitterly cold, and there had also been just nonstop rain. Them traversing South Carolina and North Carolina had been unbelievably unpleasant for everyone. It's just absolutely bananas when you read about the conditions these people were enduring. By that morning of the 1st, the Catawba River was 400 yards wide. So it was 4 football fields from one bank to the opposite. And the water was just freezing cold. And the fords were much deeper than they normally would have been. They saw the American campfires on the other side, but they also realized that because nobody was shooting at them, that they had caught the Americans while they were all asleep, including the lookouts.
Somebody's in trouble.
Yes. Below freezing temperatures, unbelievably difficult ford to cross, but if they were quiet, they could get across it before anybody would realize that they were literally feet away from the American encampment. So they got ordered to start going across the river. They were riding across on those fords, 4 horses abreast, everybody with poles to try to keep track, and everybody trying to link to each other to keep each other from being swept away. And to give you an idea of how desperate things were for the Americans in terms of supplies and the conditions that they were in, the cold temperatures, the bad weather, Greene, a general on the American side, he wrote of this army in specific, quote, "More than 1/2 our number are in a manner naked. So much so that we cannot put them on the least kind of duty. Indeed, there is a great number that have not even a rag of clothes, except a little piece of blanket in the Indian form around their waist." These people were essentially naked and wearing kilts in below freezing temperatures, totally exposed with no shelter, and waiting for an unbelievably well-armed and outfitted British army to walk up to them and start shooting.
It was a different time, you see.
It was a different time.
Can you imagine motivating anyone to leave the comfort of their home to that level of discomfort in this country now?
Yeah,
like
right.
willfully?
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
We can't even get people to vote.
Yeah, right. And there are stories of people who were in this army who put up with unbelievable conditions, endured unbelievable hardship to be there. At this battle, some of the people in the Continental Army were a school teacher who was physically disabled. He could not walk, who convinced the students in the school where he taught to also volunteer for the Continental Army. They had to carry him to the battlefield and prop him against a tree every time there was a battle. And they did it and joined the battle too. And he was a veteran of the American Revolutionary War because he was so dedicated to these ideals.
But we can't get people to vote in local elections.
Right. Yeah. They try to get somebody to vote for town council, and no, it's really wild. The British made it more or less across the river before the Americans realized they were there. And when the Americans realized they were there, they started waking up the camp, and they loaded up their muskets. The landscape was basically this. The river bank was right there. And then right in front of the river bank, there was this really steep, it's not exactly a cliff, a ridge.
More than a hill.
More than a hill, steeper than a hill. You wouldn't want to climb it. That was only like 20 or 30 feet, though. And at the top of that were the American army. And the tactic of the American side was to step up to the edge, point their gun down the embankment, shoot at the British standing at the bottom, step back to be out of the line of fire themselves, reload, step back up to the embankment, point their gun down, and shoot at the British who had now advanced several feet. It's an unbelievably unpleasant situation to imagine, just unbelievably unpleasant. And the British, meanwhile, had cannons on the other side of the river shooting at that embankment. And the Americans were waiting for all the reinforcements at all those other forwards to ride in and reinforce them, because there were only like 200 Americans sitting there waiting for this to happen. So it was an exceptionally bloody battle. British side claimed that they had almost no casualties, but there are reports that question that. The Americans suffered tremendous casualties, and it was a real rout by the British, but it bought the Americans time, and it allowed the British to get overconfident again, and so they kept pursuing American forces afterward.
That's the history of the British.
Yeah,
The British got overconfident again.
Pretty much. You can tell sometimes that they're our parent country.
Yeah.
This strategy of get the British to keep pursuing us and stretch them further and further out kept working, and eventually led to the surrender at Yorktown. But in the meantime, this battle at Cohen's Ford was an important part of encouraging the British to fall for that trap.
Mm-hmm.
At that battle, one of the commanders, not the only commander, but one of the commanders, was a guy named Brigadier General William Lee Davidson. And he was commanding a unit at that battle. And as soon as the battle started, he, according to accounts, was shot through the heart and died immediately. And that is part of why this was such a British rout, because as soon as he died, some of his forces broke and started to run. The British got to his body first, and they took his wallet, which is important because it included a bunch of letters.
They ran his pockets.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. But they knew that he would have letters from General Washington and from other commanders on the American side and things like that. And they needed to get that intelligence.
It's just funny. I'm looking at my wallet. It's sitting on the table and it's so small.
Yeah,
it's just a funny thought. I got his wallet.
One of the things I read about this went out of its way to say wallet at the time meant something more like what we would call a briefcase.
I picture the wallet. Let's just go with the visual of just a little brown leather wallet. Yeah.
I'm going to say he had one of those little like Velcro Izod numbers from the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was the 80s. It was just the 1780s.
1780s, yeah.
But no, he had a big leather satchel that they called a wallet. They also, in the course of stealing that wallet, got all of his money, which was $3.12. And that's an important number.
Today's economy, that's, I don't know. I can't do that.
It's actually not much these days because colonial dollars printed by the first American government were not worth very much. But so that wallet is actually on display to this day in the London Public Records Office, because that's where it was taken when it was shipped back during the Revolutionary War. And for 1 year in 2001 and 2002, they allowed it to be on display in the United States, but there was a lot of pomp and circumstance around getting it here. It's really fascinating to read about. Could be its own story.
Someone needs to tell Nicolas Cage.
Yes.
And I said this before, this could be the next national treasure.
It could be.
We need to get that wallet back.
Apparently, a reporter asked the person tasked with bringing it over if it was possible that it would stay longer than 1 year. And that person was very clear that it would not stay longer than 1 year, or there would be trouble. So,
what are you going to do? What are you going to do, England? You going to lose some more territory over it?
Going to quit the EU over it? Brexit that wallet. So the Americans were concerned that the British might come back and mutilate Davidson's body. You know, they knew that the British had gotten to the body and taken things from it. And they were worried that if they did not do something with his corpse, that the British would come back and do things to it rather than just take things from it.
Mhm.
So that night, the collected forces, they got his body off the battlefield and they went straight to a church that existed at the time and still exists today, which was Hopewell Presbyterian Church.
Mhm.
And they buried his body there. And his gravestone is there and it's maintained and has little American flags by it. And it gets decorated on Memorial Day and
Nice.
all kinds of things. And it's been there for now almost 250 years. But the legend part of it is that every year on February 1st, it is said,
It is said.
it is said,
It is spoken.
it is said that General Davidson himself appears on horseback in the vicinity of Hopewell Church, riding up and down the road and around the graveyard looking for his grave.
Looking for his wallet.
It might be looking for his wallet.
I lost my wallet. I can't go home. Can't be riding this horse without my license. Where's my wallet?
Oh my God. I would love to see a horse driving license. So I wonder if, I don't know, that's a trivia question for another time. Did that ever exist? At any rate, that $3.12 is relevant because this year, by total coincidence, I picked a story and prepared the story for Arcane before this happened. And then I saw that it had happened and was like, oh, look, we're talking about the same thing. This year on February 1st, Spooky CLT, our friends, went to the graveyard at Hopewell Presbyterian and left $3.12 on top of the grave and then waited to see would General Davidson show up to get his money and didn't report anything happening. But the reason they knew about the story was because one member of Spooky CLT actually saw an apparition of Davidson on horseback in the road in front of the church years ago before they'd ever heard this story existed.
And he would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those meddling kids.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the Charlotte Area Paranormal Society, they are a paranormal research group and they do on-site locations and stuff like that in the Charlotte area. They've been guests at Arcanecarolinas before. The church is totally aware that this legend exists and is totally okay with allowing paranormal investigation groups to work with them to conduct investigations in the cemetery. And they did an investigation on the grounds of the cemetery. In a photograph that they took of the grave, the person taking the photograph did not see anything around the grave at the time that they took the photograph, but the photograph later showed what could arguably be an apparition hovering over the grave, and the person said it looked to them like it was a woman dressed in period dress from the time, and so their suggestion was maybe Davidson's wife visits his grave every now and then, in part because when he died, she was pregnant with a child that she went on to also name William Lee Davidson. And that child is important in North Carolina history and in regional history because he grew up to be pretty wealthy and lobbied the state of North Carolina to name Davidson County for his father.
Okay.
And gave the land that became Davidson College in order for Davidson College to be named for his father. So if you've ever rooted for Davidson College, or you've ever gone to Davidson College, or you've driven through Davidson County, that is all named for this guy who was a really brave hero of the American Revolution and who to this day may, at least annually, ride around the neighborhood on his horse.
Contractual. He's got to do it annually.
He has to do it to keep renewing his rights.
Yeah.
It's like Sony making Spider-Man movies.
Yeah. He doesn't. It's part of the deal for the wallet.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's,
Maybe there was actually a little bit more than $3.12 in there. And he's like, no, nobody's managed to give me the right amount of money.
yeah, maybe that's it. I don't know.
I just find it really fascinating, though, that this is a place that's in the middle of nowhere. It's not the middle of nowhere, but it's pretty rural, especially for it being around Charlotte. And if you go look at it, or if you've ever driven through there, then it can be surprising to think that there is something like that in that place.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it just reinforces the fact that these stories are everywhere. They're all around us. There's always some story like this just waiting to be found around the corner from wherever we are.
That's such a great thing that I can't follow it with a joke because that's the whole crux of the show. So you're like, and that's what we're about. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you doing that one. There was some stuff in there that I didn't remember from the last time we got to talk about it. And it was fun talking about it at Retcon, but there was, for those that weren't there, it was a very noisy room. And it wasn't anyone's fault. I'm not complaining about the convention, but lent itself to live, but not recording.
Yeah, totally. And that's okay.
Yeah, we love Retcon. We're going to apply to go next year.
Right.
We had a really good time.
Yeah. But that's the story of General Davidson, the ghostwriter of Hopewell. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes, behind the scenes information, and links to our social media, check out www.arcanecarolinas.com, where you can also buy the Arcane Carolinas book.
And if you like award-winning horror and science fiction, check out my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com or visit my publisher, Falstaff Books, at falstaffbooks.com. And if you have story suggestions, comments, or questions, email us at arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. And thanks for listening. The Charlotte area paranormal